All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome while we're
Hai
waiting for
semuanya.
other participants and people who would like to be in the discussion.
Selagi kita menunggu
Very
peserta lain ya,
interesting topic tonight.
kita
Last
ada
month
topik menarik.
we started in Indonesia with a film called Pulau Plastic, and
Kita memulai program
today
ini
we're
dengan
going
pemutaran
to
film
travel to
plastik.
Philippines, the
Dan sekarang
Philippines.
kita
I
akan
hope that you have
berjalan-jalan ke
already
Filipina.
seen the movie, the interesting movie, and we were
Kita akan
going
membahas
to
film menarik ini.
have a discussion on the making of let me write the claw. Hello, everyone. Okay, I'm here again. I'm back again. I'm so sorry for the connection. I a very interesting film about worker and also environment in Philippines. This film that we're going to be discussed is In the Claws of a Century Wanting. And we have the filmmaker here, Jewel Maranan. And also we have other two panelists that we're going to have a discussion with, Puri Kencana Putri and also Krishna Ariola. And so before we start, I think just to repeat again on the housekeeping for all of you who want to have a simultaneous interpretation, you can use the button below, interpretation button below, and just choose Bahasa Indonesia to hear the whole discussion. So let's just start with the introduction, ladies, and let's start with Jewel as the filmmaker. Maybe if you can give a short introduction about yourself, and then followed with Puri, then the last but not least, Krishna. Please, Jewel.
Thank you, Filma. So I'm Jewel Maranan. I'm the filmmaker of the movie In the Claws of a Century Wanting, set in Tondo, Manila, in the Philippines capital city. I'm very glad to be here. I'm a documentary filmmaker. Also, I produce documentaries in different countries in Asia, in Iran, in Vietnam. And most of the films that I do have to do with tracing history in ordinary life. And this film is my second directing feature, which I finished in 2017, about the urban poor sector or urban poor situation in the Philippines, and also the housing situation, as well as about the manifestations of neoliberal globalization in the country.
Thank you, Joel. So honored to have you here. Puri, maybe you can also give us a big background on your work and about yourself.
Thank you, Tilma. Good evening, everyone. My name is Puri Kencana Putri, and at the moment I'm working with Twitter Indonesia and Malaysia, dealing for public policy. But I used to work with human rights NGOs, several human rights NGOs based in Jakarta, Indonesia, dealing with civil liberties, accountability, state accountability, and how as a public could achieve the quality of improvement of our livelihood. So happy to join with the all panelists tonight. Over to Tilma. Thank you.
Thank you, Puri. And then Krishna. Krishna, can you please give us a bit background about what you do and also a bit about yourself, please?
Hi, everyone. I'm Krishna from the Philippines. I work at Activista, a learning center for human rights and democracy. And we also organize our flagship projects are centered on screening human rights centered film features. We recently concluded our Human Rights Festival just a few weeks ago. Background on myself, I organize communities towards environmental and climate justice. My work has been mostly on helping out young fisher folk, farmers, indigenous peoples, and empowering and bringing their stories to bigger platforms as well, and telling our own story of our community, because our province has a long history of fight against fossil fuels and coal-fired power plants. I also live in a province which has recently been highly urbanized. So yeah, the film was a really nostalgic thing to experience. Thank you.
Is it in the same location that you used to live, right? Or is it where you live now?
It's not the same location, but it's very familiar anywhere in the Philippines.
Sure. Thank you, Krishna. Okay, well, let's get to the discussion. For those of you who want to ask questions, please do or you can write up in the chat box, and or you can also raise your digital hand, and I can choose you to talk directly to our panelists. Now, I think before we start with the general question about more to the issue, I think it would be really insightful if we can get a comment or a response from the other two panelists here about the film itself. What do you think about the film? How do you kind of because I also remember Puri was mentioning about your experience, Puri, in Manila and all that. So maybe if you can share with us, what do you think and about the film itself? Please, maybe we can start with Puri.
Thank you, Tilma. First of all, I'd like to congratulate Jewel for your masterpiece. That actually I found your film really impressive, and people I think can access to on a movie to watch it online. And this 2 long hours actually really close to my heart, because I used to live in Manila. I spent a year, studied at Ateneo University for my master degree. I used to live behind of Ateneo, wherein the slum area consists of the urban poor communities living over there. They live in a very small house, consists of 6 to 7 peoples. I saw like in the evening they do gambling. In the afternoon, usually they do karaoke, and throughout the days they do drinking sessions. But I'm not trying to be stigmatized with what Filipino doing for their daily basis, but I think issues such as access of information, it's also related to the quality of livelihood for all of urban poor communities across the Philippines, not only in Manila. And I think when I saw your movie, you have been captured a lot of sites from the society in Manila, in Metro Manila. The story about impoverishment, it's not a standalone story. You put a very how to say, like really life things that they are facing in the daily basis. Philippines communities also strong believers of Catholic as the majority religion in the Philippines. But I also see from your film that the interaction between the church institution and the community also, giving a strong influence on how people could perceive their way of living. And I think the daily struggling in Metro Manila, you have been capturing in a very eloquent way, because sometimes people who are living in the urban area, the richest one, also have this kind of perception that poverty or impoverishment is more related with the way of living, the lifestyle. The more you spend your money for the irrelevant things, like cars, jewelries, phone, that that they perceive as the unnecessary things for the poor ones. But I think we can see a lot of similarities across the urban poor communities in big Asia Pacific, also in Indonesia, wherein the systemic injustice also cannot eradicating the quality of living for many of urban poor communities especially. And I think when these families, I think I tried to count, I think there are 4 families if I'm not mistaken. The way they strategize their living, I think it's so familiar. Things that the same things also happening in Indonesia. I think when we talk about urban groups, it's not a standalone groups. It consists with very varied social status of people. So your film, I think, need to be watched by the government, by the law enforcement, on how usually law enforcement or the government dealing with this kind of reality. Establishing merely on the law enforcement part related with the things like forced eviction that really close to the community, or things that related with the development perception on how to put the growth element to the certain groups. I think we need to build those kind of sensitivity when we are dealing with this kind of groups, and putting a lot of various actors coming from the religion, coming from civil society, media, or also including the government inside with the meaningful dialogue, I think we still need to pursue meaningful dialogue from time to time, because we are living in a very dynamic society wherein we cannot just install one category and one definition for the entire time, especially during this pandemic. I think the essence of solidarity that could really work full in the frame of policy. I think during the Duterte times, because you filming this film in 2017, Duterte already in power, and he is still indeed still in power. And I think problem with accountability, problem with the stat labeling to the poor ones, doing the red tagging, put them as close as much with the opposition, with the communist groups. I think something that we need to be discussed carefully and openly. So this is my impression. So once again, thank you so much for your film. This is eye-opening, and all of different groups in Asia needs to watch it. Thank you. Over to Tilma.
Thank you, Corey. It's very interesting and comprehensive on Christian.
Hello. I think Thelma is getting disconnected.
Very
so
interesting and comprehensive. I think, what is relevant? Yes. Oh, sorry. Am I back?
yeah.
Am I back?
Yep.
All right. Okay. So this is your turn, Krishna.
All right. Thank you, Thelma. And it's also been
ask you about.
thank you. It's also been a
do.
pleasure to hear from Puri, her perspective, having stayed here in the Philippines for a bit. I think mine is mostly gonna come from like personal experience as well as my recent experiences. Watching the 2-hour documentary was very immersive to me. As I said earlier, the whole film was nostalgic because I grew up in a similar area. I live in the province. It didn't used to be this urbanized. There weren't that many malls or structures, infrastructures. And I remember my mom's family used to live right by the ocean, and they would just go to the ocean every day, and their livelihoods would revolve around, fishing, other, they would sell the fish, they would dry the fish and make it and sell it in the market. So yeah, it was very nostalgic. And then growing up, that scenery began to change because I remember that that whole ocean was just reclaimed. And there's a big mall right now. The biggest mall in our city, in our province, is right on top of where the ocean used to be, and that used to be our home. Um, so yeah, like the whole film really just made me feel a lot of things. I think I've yet to, there are a lot of thoughts I've yet to process, but one thing I really admired was how it captured like the everyday small details, especially when the kids are singing and talking to their parents, talking about, aswang, the monsters, talking about myths, and asking about the helicopters and the stars, and how it also managed to capture like the bigger perspective, which is figuratively and literally, it would show the area where the community would reside, and in the backdrop there are just the big buildings, the condominiums, the skyscrapers. And right now, I have been working for the environment and also for human rights for the past few years. And similarly with the film, I'm also weaving in and out of the small details, being immersed in what is actually happening and having really experienced that kind of struggle. So removing myself for picture to see the systemic problem and to see where I can help or how I can understand what's happening. And I guess, the entire film also really encapsulated what I felt about
Oh, I think Krishna is gone. Hope she will be back soon. And well, I do take a couple of notes on Krishna and Puri impression on the film. And there's a lot of how do you say? I think Puri mentioned about that the film captures both sides of society, and also there are a lot of not just message but a reality to it that it needs to be watched, and also by the government, and also by the most people here living probably in Southeast Asia. So now this is the moment of truth from the filmmaker Joel. What is your take on this? Maybe you can explain us about what makes you choose this issue as your documentary project, and if you can share us about your journey in making this film, and also your your essence of message that you really.
Um, shall I start? Okay. I shall start. I think I got
Yes,
the
sure,
question.
sure.
Yeah, I think I got the question.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so first, thank you to Puri and to Krishna for that feedback. It's really nice hearing those perspectives. Even if it's been 4 years since I first released the film, there's always something fresh that's coming from people who watched it. Um, I probably will start with how I started this film. It was actually not a film project to begin with for me. I started as a social worker right after graduation from film school. And at that time, I wasn't very um, decided yet on whether I'm going to pursue cinema or filmmaking. And I was involved um, in volunteering to different organizations that did social work in urban poor areas. And through that, um, I got to know the community of Tondo. Um, the very first impulse when you start living in Tondo, and actually I was a social worker that actually lived there. I wasn't based in an office or something like that. It was 2 years of immersion for me. And actually, the first thing that comes to mind, or that comes to a person when he or she is exposed to Tondo, is what can I do here? Like, there are so many things that um, need to be done when you're in a community, um, on different levels. Like on the level of a neighborhood, there's always some distress happening, there's always something needed on the level of the whole, like local government in the area. There could be many things. But what I got involved in was organizing among women and among young people in the community. And through that, I something grew in me during the first year of being a social worker there. It was specifically one moment when I was talking to a midwife, a community midwife, whose job is to respond to women who were going to give birth at the moment in the community and who didn't have access to hospital care. So I was talking to a midwife one afternoon, and she was telling me how women lack access to hospital medical care, and how they were actually refused. It's not just that they couldn't access, but they were actually very often refused by even public hospitals for various reasons. For example, they don't have documentation, they don't have prior checkups, etc. And then while we were talking about how people give birth in the community, how women give birth in the community, we were on the second floor of a shack, and on the other side of the street, there was an ongoing funeral. There was a casket with a dead body and a couple of people who were there watching over the casket. And I asked the midwife how long the funeral has been going on. And the midwife said that the funeral had been going on for 4 weeks already, or close to 4 weeks. And I thought, how come they not burying the dead yet? And it was said that the family didn't have enough money to buy land or a place to bury the dead. So they had to continue the funeral and earn money from gambling during those weeks. And then while we were talking about that, about birthing and the death on the other side of the road, it suddenly dawned on me that we were constantly interrupted by these container vans that were passing in between us, that were passing always in the many streets and highways that are in or lead through Tondo, Manila. Of course, Tondo, Manila is located very near or almost like at the seams of the premier international port of the country. And in these container vans, I could read the different labels very clearly because they were written in bold letters, in bold colors: Italia, Mayors, K-Line, Hyundai, China shipping. It seemed to me as though the world was passing us by while we were talking about how people lived in the place. But what was really perplexing then was that it seemed like it was a different dimension. That those container vans and the traces of the industry, of the port industry that surrounded the urban poor community of Tondo was something else. It felt like it was in the same space, but it was somehow untouchable. And then my mind just kept on wondering what could be inside those container vans, how much wealth was passing by this community where people could hardly find resources to just survive. And right then and right at that moment, it became clear to me that what we know or what we understand of poverty is often very simplistic. That what we understand of poverty is often just about the lack of money, poor management of money, no jobs, etc. Of course, these are all part of it. But what I realized then and there was that poverty and impoverishment is something that cuts across a person's life from the moment that the person is born until the moment the person dies. Everything that the person goes through is a system of impoverishment. And there is very little control for people who are born into a system, into this subsystem of society. There's very little control left for them to be able to exit or live a life differently. So a lot of things are predetermined, a lot of pathways are predetermined for them. And so that's what I became curious about. I became curious about how I could deconstruct poverty.
Jadi
And
berpikir bagaimana saya bisa mendekonstruksikan kemiskinan tersebut.
poor people, rich people, people with no resources, people with resources, from that dichotomy into something that is actually more complex and more systemic. And so that's also probably the reason why I made the film in this manner. And until the end, I actually refuse to simplify what the film is about, because I wanted it to be experienced for its complexity. Yeah.
Right. It's very interesting to hear you saying about deconstructing poverty, while also Puri was mentioned about policy and how the government then can actually, either supporting that in a good way, in a kind way, or you can just make it worsen. So I'm interesting to hear your side of perspective, Puri, in this matter. On maybe it's about the not only about the gap, but it's also about how is the um, how is the society being formed. Then there is a need for people, or for creative outlets like film to deconstruct of poverty. What is wrong? I mean, is it because of the few, or is it from different angle, or is it because just people being quite ignorant on this matter? But maybe if you can share us your view.
All right, Tilma, thank you so much for the personal explanations that Jewel already explored before. So I think policy to eradicate poverty, it's not based on the kindness and the benevolism of the governments. It should be part of the agenda. And before we set up the agenda, all the political parties, I know next year the Philippines will have a big presidential elections, wherein all the candidates, all the figures would, trying to convince people, the voters, the young voters, on how to choose the next leader in the country. But I think when we set up development policy, also including how to eradicate poverty within, we need to ensure that the upcoming government should have a clear navigation, clear roadmap, that the future outlook of the Philippines would not left behind the poor groups of the society. We cannot just put them as the numbers for voting, as the numbers of the graphics that sometimes most of the study using a lot of numbers and graphics just to explain about the actual condition. But the way Jewel and other creative groups in the Philippines, I think when you trying to communicate classical issues but still important, sometimes a lot of distraction happening in the country, because of the reckless policy that has been decided by the government or by the law enforcement. But I think the persistence element, wherein the creative groups, including with the filmmakers, that still have a new angle on how to utilizing their power to giving the voiceless groups of people that doesn't have a strong voice to influence the power, I think it's something that we need to explore more in the future. I think with the power of technology, social media, and the easier way to access of information, I think we need to highlight a lot of issues that has been put under the rug of the impoverishment, because impoverishment is not just, as Jewel said, lack of money, lack of willingness to grow up, but it's about major big systemic problems inside of poverty issues. There are a lot of layers, like, for example, the Philippines has been mentioning as one of the countries that promote, or not promote, but having child prostitution problem. So issue like child prostitution problem also part of the poverty issue, or like issues like extrajudicial killings and perception about the opposition in the country. I think it's something that need to be debunked and need to be discussed openly. And I think media, including filmmaker, news platforms, I've been a big fan of Rappler's, CBN, ABS in the Philippines. I think you did a great job and still doing a great job on how to dismantling the systemic problems in the Philippines. And I think it's also need to build up and escalate, because in Asia Pacific we have a big movement called Milk Tea Alliance, wherein all the youngsters, young students also having a very clear and very sharp perspective on how we can use our solidarity, and this is not just a solidarity, and how to change from inside, how to change the false narrative when we build power that left behind the vulnerable groups for so long, for decades and years. So I think combination between the creative ones, academics, journalists, media, civil society, we need to still collaborate in the future. Over to Tilma.
Thank you. I think as you mentioned as well about the technology, and a bit about how society can take major role in this work. I think I shouldn't say. I think it's a bit hopeful on stating eradicating poverty while you're actually trying to deconstruct it, right? So, but just to give, I think to understand the view from the young generations, from your side, Krishna, do you think, can you foresee a power shift as now we are living in a digital world, from from usually we have a scheme of top-down approach, and now you have the ability and the freedom to speak up, and also to not just only play the game but change the game. So how do you see then this power shift in the environment and also economic and social issues in your country, or probably in the region?
I think this generation is ready to step up because we do not have a choice. I guess that's the big picture of it. With social media, everyone has a platform. Before, without social media, only those who are journalists, only those who write in print or in the news, they're the only ones who have platform. But right now everyone can speak up. But there's also the threat that we're not the only ones who can use that space. People who want to use it to maintain the status quo, to maintain their power, to keep their power above everyone else, is also using the space. So I guess that's why I agree with Puri. What we need to do is really work together, wherever we come from different sectors, the creatives, um, the social workers, the activists, the youth, the church. Um, Everyone has to work together because it is only when we are grounded in our communities and when we have a clear vision of where we want to go that we can utilize or really use this space, use our platforms in the way that can really shift the narrative and shift the power, to make sure also that we won't end up like we won't just end up repeating this systemic problem. So I guess the youth of today, we are bombarded with a continuous stream of information. Every day, there's just so much news, so much new information, um, and it's hard. It's hard to process that, but also I think because of things like this, because we keep creating spaces for discussions, we keep trying to tell stories in through different perspectives. I think the young people are looking towards, looking inwards and seeing that they have the power to change things and that we can reimagine and also really tell our own stories and shape them, because we can't just stand and sit down in front of our screens. Things like this really move us to stand up and take action. And I guess building solidarity really is should be the heart of everything that we do. All of the work that we do should be pulled together towards building solidarity, because that is the only way we can move this forward and escalate what we're already doing.
Thank you. For the participants, thank you for your question. We have one question coming here from Nabila. Nabila is asking Jewel about how do you see the filmmaking, especially documentary in Southeast Asia, become a voice of youth to do changes? Your thought, Jewel.
Thanks for that question, Nabila. Nabila.
Yes, Nabila.
I think the past 10 years was really a good decade for documentary in the Philippines and in Southeast Asia. When I started practicing documentary filmmaking, I could hardly pinpoint anyone else who was doing the same thing. Like probably those who were strong enough to like survive the past decades, but only a couple of people. But it's very hard to find a community. But it's been in the past 10 years, the community in Southeast Asia and in the Philippines has started growing, not just in number, but also stronger in terms of expression, in terms of variety of documentaries that are being produced, also how strong the voices are, how bold, how daring the voices are. It's definitely a good form of expression, a good form of like also information. In fact, like a couple of documentaries in the past couple of years had been really remarkable in responding to pressing issues in the Philippines. For example, the extrajudicial killings, the bombing of indigenous communities, and all that. But I also think that although artists are artists and we do what we do best, at the end of the day, we are also like participants of of society, participants of movements. So we are both creatives who can do something, but at the same time, we are also part of, let's say, organizing among people who are pushing for change and all that. And I think just doing documentaries for, let's say, 10, 20 years and not doing something else is something that could be a little bit, that could lead to somewhere like to a very hollow practice. ideally, when somebody makes documentaries, he or she is also a participant in something else, participant in life, participant in movements, etc., is able to immerse in what's actually happening there rather than always being at the point of being a mediator. So yeah.
Right. Just a follow-up question, I think, from filmmaker perspective. As I know it has been 4 years since you made the movie, and also you also mentioned about the inspiration behind it. But can you share us a couple of moments that is unforgettable for you, and maybe um, also moments that you know that this film is something that many people is going to benefit from, and do you have that kind of hope while you're having the journey of making the film?
Yeah, of course. Every time that you invest a part of your life in making a movie, which spans like, well, the production spans for like maybe 3, 4, 5 years, you have the hope that it's something that's going to be useful, not just for people in your country, but people who are experiencing the same in other countries. For example, one experience that was really, really like eye-opening for me was screening this film in Lagos, in Nigeria, in a film festival, the Nigeria International Film Festival. And I thought in the beginning that the Nigerian audience wouldn't have like would find it very hard to relate to this film because the pace is slow, it's very far away from them. The language may be like a big barrier, even if there are subtitles. But I was really surprised that the Nigerian audience really were able to see and correlate their experience with what they saw in the movie. And what they thought were very local issues that they were experiencing in Lagos suddenly became quite big in their heads and their minds, and they realized that it's something that that is systemic, that is shared as a tactic of government towards poor people in different nations, the way that they handle like housing programs, demolitions, and all that. And the audience really had very strong reactions. They were quite angry. It was quite the angriest audience that I ever encountered bringing this movie around. And of course, it's always a good experience to show this film to universities where young and idealistic students get exposed to a very deep and very complex reality, and it really gets them thinking. And what I like is that a lot of those Q&As do not only revolve around how the movie was made, how was the experience, what was difficult, what was easy, how did you get them to not look at the camera, but very often the discussions always sharpens to the question of what should we do now. Like it becomes then very urgent to a lot of people who watch the film, especially the young people in the universities. So yeah, and that's also a very empowering and encouraging experience whenever I have that.
Right, thank you. And following up on your statement about the comment on what to do now, there's a coming question from Anonymous asking about how do you see, I think this is for all of the panelists, how do you see religious leaders as part of the change maker, or as environmental warrior? So, and the question is stating, in Indonesia there's so many religious people, and I believe in Philippines too. So do you think religious leaders can be agent of change to save the earth? Maybe from Puri, you're first.
All right, it's a tricky question actually. So it depends
It's
on how
interesting
we
too.
brief on how we brief them, but not really on how we brief them. But I think inside of the religious organizations, like for example in Indonesia we have Nahdlatul Ulama and Muhammadiyah, because Indonesia is one of the largest Muslim populations in the world, and within of those organizations we found plenty of progressive figures that has been playing such a big roles inside of the society, dealing with moralist movement, for example, because for years in Indonesia we are facing the growing extremist sentiment coming from the conservative point of views. But I think also in the same fashion, the Philippines also having the same problems regarding with the right-wing extremism, or to some extent in the deep southern of the Philippines also still dealing with the issue of terrorism / extremism / combatant opposition with live ammunition and all. But I think when we have a good partnerships with them, with these groups, with religious leaders, either from church, from mosque, or from other believers, I think what we need to build the agenda setting is for the future, for our next generation, not for the current situation. We need to build up the same sentiment that in the future problems like what happened in Marawi, for example, like both of the government and the MILF got stuck and killed each other over there, and each of the groups also built the on narratives on how to keep Marawi in power. But I think in the future, when we set up the same agenda, when we put it the same willingness with them, I think there is no nonsense approach where we wanted to invite them as part of the key actors, key players to set up the agenda setting for the Philippines. I know Philippines has been, one of the key playmakers in Southeast Asia, dealing with China, dealing with South China Sea conflict, and stuff in between. But I think accountability is mandatory. Problems like things that happening inside of the church, molested with the children, domestic violence that involving the church actors. I think something that we need to be openly discuss, so that there is no groups that feel left behind when we set up the agenda. Trust and mutual commitment can be achieved if we can reveal truth from the past, like Cory Aquino did after Marcos stepped down from the power. But I think in the Philippines, the homework are still plenty and many, as much as we have in Indonesia. So I think inviting key actors, including with the religious figures, as well as the youth, putting them in the same room, engage with them, I think something that we need to pursue in the future.
Thank you, Puri. Your thought, Krishna. Do you think religious leaders can we count on them to save the earth?
I would speak specifically on environment. My experience the past years, the church, especially the Catholic Church here in the Philippines, the ones who are organized and have associations and coalitions, they are anchored on the encyclical letter of the Pope, which is Laudato Si. So they've actually been key actors in pushing for policies and for environmental protection and conservation here in the Philippines, and hopefully in other countries as well, because of the encyclical letter of the Pope. But yeah, from my experience working in communities, the church is always a big power player. This is where the people gather, and the words of the church are always taken, by the people. And having the church understand what's happening, and also, with the youth, sitting with them and working together, I think it can really create a strong change if it's for the better. So yeah, I guess with regards to the environment itself, my experience here, I'm not Catholic, but the Catholic Church has had really strong sides when it comes to environmental conservation, and I hope that it can also, be echoed in other countries as well.
Thank you. Well, for all the other participants of the discussion, if you want to ask question, please do use your digital hand, or just click on the raise hand button there at below on the platform below, or you can just write your question on the quick Q&A icon there. And I'm going to ask Jewel before we get another question coming, while we're waiting for more question coming. What is your next film? Is there any exciting film or project that you are working on?
Yes, unfortunately, I can't disclose because
Yes.
it's quite sensitive security-wise. So
Maybe you can share about the sector or issue.
no,
Is it different?
no.
Well, whatever it is, we're going to be your biggest fan
Thank
here
you.
in Indonesia. And yes, we are looking forward to see your next film. And I guess we have 5 more minutes, and I am curious to just get an understanding from the film. And starting from the film, we do talk about the public policy, and also the construction of poverty in our society, and also the environment, and how we can, together we can march along the change for the benefit of the people. But just to give you an overview, I think it's also great if you want to give a short final thought on this movie related to the program itself, Earth on Screen, because we're trying to start the conversation about documentaries that is focused on environment and also how to save Mother Earth. So maybe your final thought on this, and what can public or the audience learn about the movie and also about the process? Maybe starting from Jewel?
That's quite a difficult question, but then I guess what I can say is that, because on another note, besides like making this movie, I've also been a big worrier of what's been happening. I'm on the level of that. What's been happening about the climate crisis, the ecological crisis that we're in, and the level at which we're able to respond. While I do admire people who are really at the forefront of these battles in different countries and worldwide, I also am at the level that I'm thinking that where is, like, up to what point can these be won? Very obviously, the battle about the environment is also the battles that is grounded. The foundation of it are the battles that we've been trying to win about the classical issues in our societies in general. The battle for the environment cannot be won just by itself alone. For many countries, it requires systemic change. It requires new eras in politics, etc. So I guess it's a holistic understanding that's necessary to get more people concerned. Also, to be able to craft effective ways of campaigning this and getting people to participate. Because, for example, if we just from the point of view of someone who worked on a movie about and with the urban poor, if we talk about environmental issues there in the community while their pressing issues are really gut level, then you will seem in the beginning out of tune. But of course, when you look at it from a grand perspective, from a bigger perspective, then that's when you realize that these are all interconnected. And the people who are going to be most immediately affected by catastrophic changes in our environment are going to be the people in the margins. So yeah, it requires not just, I think, thinking about the environment itself and environmental issues, but really thinking about how this concerns different people in society and different people who are going through different experiences, levels of experiences in society. The issue of the environment is something that's very easy to what do you call this, explain to a middle class, a student, a young professional, or somebody who has a very hopeful outlook in life and is looking forward to 20, 30, 40 years to have a successful life. But to somebody who, for example, who is living on a daily basis, surviving on a daily basis, that's the challenge. And unfortunately, the people who are in this experience comprise majority of many of our society's populations. And to win this battle, we need that. We always need that sector, which is the biggest in our society. So yeah, it's a challenge.
Well, thank you for your final thought. Krishna, your final thought on the whole process, on also, you know, finding creative outlet to speak out the truth about the environment and how to march forward for the better of the society. Your thought?
I agree with everything Jewel said. It really takes deep understanding to see how systemic everything is. One thing I've learned just a few months before when I started, a few months into environmental activism, you really see the intersectionality of the climate crisis. And you can't help but also, you know, organize for other things like human rights, women, those who are really affected and are at the front lines of this crisis, one that we can't solve by just, you know, solving the symptoms of it, but really we have to solve it by its roots. So I guess as a part of the youth sector, this crisis has become really, really personal to us. A lot of us, I've talked to a lot of people who have been experiencing climate anxiety to the point where we have literally been leaving our dreams behind to, you know, to work for the environment, to pursue work in the social and social political field just to be able to change something. But we always go back to our personal aspirations, to our dreams, to what we want to be, because you know, we really see how the society affects our individual struggles and how we can only, you know, achieve justice and liberation as an individual and in our community if the rest of society also becomes liberated. So yeah, this is really a challenge, and I look forward to building more solidarity across sectors and with my fellow youth.
Thank you for sharing us your final thought. Puri, your final thought on the whole process and also what we can do to change to change the world. And probably um, interesting about I found it interesting about your view on the policy, because that is something that is quite complex but necessary. Maybe your thoughts on what needs to be done, what is the priority right now.
Yeah, I think this pandemic has revealed what we actually want, what kind of government that we really want, what kind of society that we really want, and what kind of solidarity form that we really need to sustain in the future. Because I think for the last 2 years, we saw a lot of, unprofessional government, unprofessional bureaucracy dealing with the pandemic, how to distribute vaccine expansion, and how to ensure that this kind of things is mandatory for everyone to be survived and push down the numbers of the death because of the COVID-19. But I think in the future, as I also agree with Jewel, with Krishna, that cross-cutting interests, cross-cutting groups, and putting forward the needs of the youth, because they are the face of the future of this world, that we cannot just leave behind them and just believe with the political party or just believe with the old establishment. We need to build something coherent in the future, so that all the conversation that we have been built on social media, on digital platforms, on things that we have been digest from home for the last 2 years, would be, lead to something meaningful in the future, collectively and personally. Because if we feel triggered personally, but we don't actually do something for the society or collectively, it's nothing, it's nonsense. So what Jewel did with her ways, what Krishna did with her community, and everyone on this room doing by yourself or together, is something meaningful that we need to keep in touch and work together for sure. Over to Tilma.
That is a brilliant closing for our discussion for tonight. And thank you so much for the panelists, Jewel, Puri, and Krishna, for a very engaging and rich discussion. I'm enjoying, I hope I'm enjoying it as much as you do. So people who participate in the discussion here, the audience, I just want to remind you again, next month, our Earth on Screen film will be from Vietnam. I think it's also your movie, Joel. It's called the Future Cries Beneath Our Soil. So do not miss it, and please stay in touch. Just what Puri was saying, and please do follow our Earth on Screen information on social media. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Puri,
Thank you.
Krishna, Tilma.
Thanks, Jewel. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Kakak Sekar.